Hey there, welcome to Built by Bands. In today's guide we're going to cover the calf raise and the fundamentals of it, some things you need to be aware of, specifically with the X3 system, and then we'll get into some examples, because in this case it's a lot easier to learn how to do it just by viewing it as opposed to me talking your ear off about it. So the first thing with calf raises, especially with X3, is that it requires a lot of balance, just personal balance. And then also ensuring that the tension of the bands and your plate and everything is well balanced. Otherwise you run the risk of falling off the plate and launching the plate, or some other bad things that could happen there. So I'm going to show you some ways to overcome that, but that's the first thing you need to be aware of. And this is one of those exercises where you definitely want to start with a lower band until you get very comfortable with the tension and balancing and how you position yourself with the whole system before going up to the heavier bands, because with the lighter bands it's a lot more forgiving in terms of your equilibrium balance. If you're slightly off while you're using like the white band or something, it's not going to launch the plate if for some reason you have to like step off the plate or something like that. But if you're using the heavier bands like the black band and you lose your balance and have to fall off the plate for a second, that thing is going through your roof. So that's the first word of caution there. Just an anecdotal example. I was showing X3 to a friend of mine who was very interested in getting the system, so he was doing a workout with me, and I advised him, hey, you should probably use the lighter band for the calf raises. And he was like, no, I'm good, I can do the black band. He's probably strong enough to do the black band just fine, but he underestimated how much you have to balance, because there is a learning curve with the system, and he got off balance and had to step off the plate, and that sucker went like straight to the ceiling and came back down and like smashed on a table. Thankfully nothing was broken, but that could have been really bad if that would have gone like up into his face or something. So this is one of those ones where you want to set the ego aside for a minute and make sure you're very stable with the exercise before going too hard on it. I will also say with this one, I think it almost doesn't matter what band you're using for the calf raises, and here's why. This is like the one exercise you can do to maximum extension, because you actually can't lock out at the top because of the way our muscle structure works for this particular movement. Your muscle's actually working the hardest if you go all the way up on your toes as hard as you possibly can. So that's why if you're using one of the lighter bands or the heavier band and you're ensuring that you go to that like maximum point where you're squeezing the calf as hard as you possibly can, I don't really think it makes a whole lot of difference between like the light gray band or the black band. I fluctuate almost every time I do this, just to kind of see where I'm at and how it feels and everything. But overall, I think you get a ton out of the exercise, whether you're using a lighter band or the bigger one. So the only things you may gain by using the heavier bands as opposed to the lighter ones is your grip strength is going to have to work harder, obviously, because it's increased tension on the bar. So your arms and everything will be flexing a lot harder, your shoulders, with the heavier bands. But if you're just concerned about really getting your calves good, you're maybe not too confident in your balance, or it's kind of developing, just use the lighter band. Really focus on squeezing those calves super hard and kind of pausing at the top, which I'm going to demonstrate. But those are basically the fundamentals for this one. It's a very simple exercise. It just requires some concentration, and a method I use on my very first rep every time is I just slowly go up, so that if for some reason I am off balance, I can just quickly step back down with my heels, readjust everything, go back up slowly again, make sure I'm set, and then continue into the exercise. So that's just a little tip I recommend doing every time. It's just kind of a, check in to make sure you're good before you start going at it too hard and avoid injury. So that's pretty much it. So now let's get into the demonstrations for how to do the calf raises, and I'll talk you through the key things about the exercise with the demonstration. Also, what I'm going to do is show an alternative because the standard way is standing calf raises, which is the superior way to do the calf raises with the X3 because you're triggering your entire body. But if you have injuries or your balance isn't good enough, or really any reason, for some reason you just can't do the standing one very well, there is an alternate way you can do it seated. So I will demonstrate that as well in this video here for those of you who need it. But just keep in mind that the desired way you want to do the calf raises is standing. So if you have to use the seated version, just use it as a kind of a building block to try and get to the standing position. Obviously, if you have limiting injuries that will never change, then that's a different situation. But if it's just a balance issue, you can use the seated ones to develop your calves enough, and then over time, try and work up to doing the standing. So, all right, let's dive into the examples. Okay, so first up, we're going to cover the standing calf raise. And in these clips, you're going to see how it's done. So the first thing is to make sure your feet are properly aligned. So as you see where my feet started, they were kind of over the top of the platform. So you need to move them back so that your toes are directly over the band, as that arrow showed. See the way the pressure is pulling up on the band, you want your toes to be directly on top of it so that the platform doesn't wobble. And then as you come down, you want to make sure that your heels never touch back down to the platform or like the middle of your foot there like mine. There's a slight gap there where that arrow was pointing. Just slow and controlled. Make sure you get a good squeeze at the top. So here's another angle. So as you go up, first rep, nice and slow to make sure you're balanced. And then you can see I'm squeezing there. My heels elevate a pretty good amount. So you want to make sure you're really getting a solid squeeze at the top and kind of pausing for a second there. Because that's where you're really going to activate the muscle group, and it's going to make this most effective. Here in a second, we're going to switch to some other views that are going to show you how to let your feet come down slowly without ever releasing tension on the band. So it's very subtle, but you can see there's still just a slight gap underneath my foot and the plate, and this is really key to keeping that constant time under tension. And if you're able to do this, it's a lot of stabilization firing for one, but two, it really targets the calf muscle very heavily. So you can see there very clearly there's a slight gap on the back half of my foot. It never comes back down to the plate. So you need to do these the same way. For the seated calf raise, you start in the deadlift position, pull it up, and then as you slowly go down, carefully place it on your knees, kind of where the meaty part of your thigh is before it gets to your knee. And then ensure that your toes are directly over the band and the plate so that it's pulling as directly upward as possible, and conduct the calf raise just like you would if you're standing. If this is a little uncomfortable on your legs, you can use pretty much anything to provide some cushion. You just don't want it to be too thick so that you can still keep it nice and in position. I mean, you can use a towel, you could wrap a sweatshirt around it, you can use a pool noodle, just something to give yourself a little bit of cushion so it doesn't scratch your legs. And then your hands are there just to stabilize it and keep it from flying off your knees. So you're really not using your arms. When you're done, carefully stand back up and then slowly release the tension down. Okay, that pretty much wraps up the guide for the calf raises, both standing and seated. One last note regarding the calf raises is if you're going to wear shoes, you need to wear something that's pretty solid. Like, you don't want to wear a running shoe. Running shoes are generally pretty squishy and have a lot of cushion to them. That's not what you want, because that's going to be a little bit too unstable, and you don't want your foot compressing and wiggling while you're doing this. It's already hard enough to balance as is. You don't need to add that extra complexity. So I'm wearing some thick Nike Metcons. They're designed for the gym. They've got a pretty thick rubber sole there. That's real flat. You can wear something like Vans, a skate shoe basically. Just don't go and wear like a running shoe that's got a real thick sole on it. You want it to be relatively firm and flat, so that way it's not interfering with your ability to go up and down under control. A lot of people do this barefoot. Totally fine to do it barefoot. For me, it just hurts the ball of my foot a little bit too much, but if you have no issue with that, it's probably better just to do it barefoot. because then you're getting as much stabilization firing as possible. You don't have the shoe helping you hold position. So pretty minor thing there, but just be cautious of not using a really squishy shoe of some sort, because it could be a little bit more dangerous. As always, if you think these are useful and you want to subscribe to the channel, the link will be on one of these sides. And I will also post the link here to other guide videos like this, so you can see the playlist. Thanks for tuning in, appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out at any time. Take care.